Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Open Your Eyes to the Universe. I'm Gabrielle Martin, your host for this evening, and it's lovely to be back with you, having spent February in Mount Abu, India. If you're joining for the first time, Open Your Eyes to the Universe is a series of contemporary talks, conversations, open-eyed meditations, and interviews with people who inspire and uplift others by sharing their wisdom with us, their insights, and their experiences to co-create a better world. And as we begin, the Youniverse team would like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet. We pay our respects to the elders of the past, the present, and those emerging, and acknowledge their spiritual connection to country. And we also acknowledge and respect the wise elder within us all and the collective wisdom of those here this evening. So a warm welcome. Now, you may recall that in January, our last episode, we were in the company of Gail Atherton, a feng shui master and a meditation practitioner. As we opened 2023, Gail explored with us the spiritual resources required in this year of the water rabbit. I hope you can remember some of the things that she shared with us, and if you can't, then treat yourself to a trip back to that time and check it out on the Youniverse channel. But here we are tonight, and we're in the company of education designer and pedagogical coach Chanah Wainer, and her topic is the spirit of education. Wonderful topic, the spirit of education. And so, viewers, before we get into this, here's a question for you to reflect on. When thinking about your education, what comes to mind first? What's been your experience? Did your education honour who you are and who you wanted to become? Deep questions, aren't they? And we're going to expand on that later tonight. But you can share your reflections in the chat box if you like, and we'll come back to it later in our conversation with Chanah. So the question again, when thinking about your education, what comes to mind first? What's been your experience? So have a think about it, and if you wish, put your answer or your reflections, your insights into the chat box. But I'm guessing that in response to that question, we're most likely to think about our schooling years and to instantly recall whether it was an enjoyable, uplifting, or perhaps it was a rather restrictive or maybe even a punishing experience. And maybe too, it changed over time. Perhaps we started out with great gusto and enthusiasm, and then much later on, we found ourselves bunking or wagging from sheer educational irrelevance and boredom in our later schooling years. Or maybe you grew up in a culture that had huge respect for teachers and education, coupled with very high expectations to achieve. So much so that you stayed up late at night swatting and memorizing information to regurgitate it in examinations in a somewhat competitive vein. Or perhaps you share a view and experience different from most things that we're exposed to. And maybe you have a view that education is lifelong learning and it's concerned with aspirations for yourself, for each other, and for the world beyond. But whatever our experiences, I'm sure they are varied. And we're honoured here tonight because our guest is Chanah Wainer. And she considers that the idea of education, so not what education might be in practice, but that the idea of education is one that extends far beyond the classroom walls to encapsulate and experience all the experiences that shape how we learn and grow as people. It refers to who we are and who we yet want to become. Beautiful, isn't it? A beautiful concept. And in light of this, all of life and our many relationships within it become educative experiences for our journey. And Chanah considers that this idea enables us to shift the emphasis of design from formal learning as well by asking the simple yet profound spiritual question of what is needed. Simple, clear, what is needed. Instead of trying to control and organize the external structures and systems of education, we can seek instead to realign with the deeper spirit of education. So this is an insightful position to hold, isn't it? So let me tell you more about our guest, Chanah Wainer. As I mentioned, she's an education designer, and we're going to find a little bit more about that tonight. A pedagogical coach, excuse me, and a budding futurist. And she has over 2 decades, long time, 2 decades experience working across diverse settings of both formal and informal learning. And these have included primary special needs, and high schools, as well as higher education and private community colleges. So a very broad amount of experience here. And Chanah's understanding and approach combine her extensive professional experience, 4 tertiary qualifications, including a master's in teaching, and honours in learning sciences, and her current PhD research in teacher education. And she combines this with almost 20 years experience as a facilitator and student of Raj Yoga meditation. An amazing combination, isn't it? In January this year, she launched her flagship coaching program as a retreat, and it was entitled The Enlivened Educator. Now, I know Chanah, not so much in her professional capacity, as impressive as it is, but in an equally impressive capacity, I know Chanah is a gifted songwriter and musician and a meditator. So Chanah, welcome to Youniverse. It's lovely to have you with us this evening, and we're looking forward to hearing a lot from you about this engaging topic, the spirit of education.
I want to hear more about this Chanah Wainer. She sounds incredible. Thank you so much. I know, like, I think this is actually, I'm going to start with this because it's such a lovely segue into the whole point of this concept. And it's, what you've just done is mirrored back to me this full-bodied, the body of work that is life. We'll use it in an artistic sense, but our life is a body of work. And so often we compartmentalize it into, oh, I did this, and that's one bullet point on my resume. And then I did that. And maybe for this job, I have to take those ones out. But you painted this full picture that has my mind blown. So thank you.
You're really, really welcome. But Chanah, I thought to start, what about you telling us about your education experience, and perhaps it's bearing on your decision to be an education designer? And for that matter, what actually is an education designer?
Okay.
Is that a good place to start?
No. Great place. So it's kind of like the what is ed design piece plus the what shaped me piece. So I'm going to go in that. I'm going to start with what's informed my move. What's the journey been really into where I am now? Yeah. Those 20 years of experience in learning and educating spaces actually started probably when I was about 8, in a formal sense, but there's one prior to that. Like, how kids, they'll play with little kitchen sets, or they'll play with toys and whatever. I always wanted to play teacher with my younger sister. And I'd completely forgotten about that, but it's hilarious. It really is. It's like, oh God. And actually, when I started my teaching degree, I messaged one of my friends and said, guess what? And I'm like, who would have known? And he's like, all of us. Like, everyone could see it except me. So I think that's a really nice nugget to hold on to, that I'll come back. There is something really innate to me and my uniqueness and my the particularities of who I am as a person that feeds into my work in education. So education becomes the vessel for me being who I am and what I have to offer in the world. And that, if you augment that, it comes back to what the idea of what education could be in a formal sense. Moving forward from playing teacher, I was involved in a youth movement when I was younger. So within the Jewish community, there are different youth groups that you can go to, activities on the weekend and things like this, and then summer and winter camps where you're away from your parents. And they're run by youth for youth. So you'll have your 18 to early uni years, 18 to 22-year-olds running these activities. If I talk too fast, it's because I'm trying to put a lot of info in. Just let me know if I need to slow down. I'm very happy to. But I would go to these experiences, and as you go through the movement, they were so compelling and involving, you end up becoming, or I became a youth leader. And then when you go to Israel afterwards for like a year of experience, you do something called hadracha, which is informal education leadership. And it's really how to create learning experiences. It was almost my first foray into education design without realizing it, because it's how to create an experience that enables someone to learn something. But because it wasn't at school, it's, you know, through games or through, you know, workshops or facilitated experiences. And so the creative juices started flowing at that age of like 18 to 22. And I moved through that. I became the state director in 2004, head of Winter Camp 2005. And after that, it was time to move on, as it becomes for everyone. After that, skip a few years, I did my undergraduate in sociology and modern Hebrew. And then after that, I ended up doing my master's of teaching. And because of my undergraduate work, I ended up moving into HISI, so teaching geography mainly, and society and culture. And what was really interesting about that was my very first year of teaching, I realized two things, three actually. One was that I had found my thing. Like, I remember going into class, it was like, you know, instant coffee wasn't doing it. It was like I was on a day, and I came out more energized than I had gone in. And it was a year 10 geography class, like death zone. But I came out with more energy than I'd gone in. And I think that I knew I'd found my thing. I was like, what? The other thing I realized, my passion within education became, at the time, the phrase was critical and creative thinking. It's now evolved, but what I noticed was that, you know, within education, you'll often try and facilitate that critical thinking using a framework of Bloom's taxonomy. Now, I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it moves through linear stages of complexity of thinking. So it might be, the first level is know, and it'll be, so the cognitive function is recall, like what was the date of, you know, that people landed at Gallipoli, and it's information recall. And as you move up, it becomes more complex, and the top level is called synthesis. In the old version, the new version is create, but at the time it was synthesis. And when I looked at the cognitive, like the prompts really for work at that level, all it was really asking people to do was rejig the pieces that are already there. Like, it was all rearranging what is known.
Right, of course, yeah.
I suddenly started problematizing that and going, but then we're never innovating. I didn't have the word innovation at the time. I hadn't moved into that world, but I was like, how do you help someone do something new? And then from that, like, what's outside of the box? How do you perceive it? How do you get there? How do you get there enough to look back? And then how do we enable our students to do that kind of thinking? Wow. So in my first year of teaching, Bloom's was very insufficient for me. And I think that was a very powerful catalyst for the rest of my journey. I'll save more of the narration. I'll let sort of anecdotes come up as they do.
Yeah.
But basically what it's led me to, the combination of all of the experiences of informal learning, my background in the performing arts, my tendency to be, you know, just quite fully creative and present, and willing to just be myself, and a strong nonconformist. I know I'm wearing like a collared thing, but I'm actually a rather strong nonconformist. I may lose some friends saying this, but I don't follow the rules. I don't agree with them unless they make sense. And most rules perpetuate things that we don't need. So I'm like, use your brain.
Hannah, I know you as someone who is deeply reflective and authentic. So yes, that would follow that if something's not measuring up, that your innate authenticity and reflectiveness would compel you to follow your path and follow your thinking.
Thank you. I think that's really it, because it's this thing of authenticity and why are we doing what we're doing? And even that question that you left off with of what is needed, that evolves with time. You know, we're not in a place where formal education requires us to bolster. The function of formal education is no longer just to bolster the economy or the workforce. You know, it's not about workforce production. It is not about turning human beings into human capital. And some of the words that I use, you know, I feel very strongly about, because a human being is not a piece of capital for policymakers to perceive of as a cog in their economic wheel.
Wow.
So when you start changing, when you ask that question of what's needed, you have to start looking at where we're at in time. And I was really appreciative that you really attended to that acknowledgement of country, because it's also, I guess for me, my sense of it is that even though I'm not, an Indigenous background, I come from South Africa, I am one of the immigrants, but to acknowledging country, for me, the feeling I get is also about acknowledging where you are in time and the people you are with in that moment, and the country and place and everything that has brought you to that moment. And so stopping, pausing, being fully present is part of what I feel is the deeper intention of acknowledging country, as much as it is about acknowledging the material. Anyway, sorry, I digress. That point of authenticity, I think, is really, really important. And so that's what really kept me going. And eventually, long story short, I got to a point where teaching was no longer, there is something that is innately teacher about me, but teaching in a classroom was a pond that became a little, I had done my work there. It was just too small. It was time to grow and stretch and expand. I left teaching at the end of 2016, moved into, I wanted to do my PhD, but my master's was coursework. So I had to do a degree to get into my degree. So I did an honors. Yeah. And this, I guess, is an important piece, because the honors looked at how we perceive causality, cause and effect, and why there's a very strong tendency amongst researchers and students of all ages to perceive cause and effect in very simplistic terms and not to perceive complex causal processes, and what we can sort of theorizing a bit, what we can do about that, how we can shift our capacity to perceive causal processes and complex, and also really like tolerate complexity in the world through that. All of those pieces really culminated in me asking these deeper, what we would call ontological questions about the nature of things themselves, those things sometimes being abstract concepts. So it's not just what's the nature of a tree, but what's the nature of causality, or what's the nature of education. And when we start to foray in that direction, then we can start to, again, realign practice with an understanding of what education is now in time. Education design itself, to be honest, could have a few different applications, or kind of is operationalized in a few different ways. But basically it would mean, if you think about project planning as sort of like concept to product with sort of, the milestones and all the things across the middle, education design to some degree is the same, but you're starting with concept and you're ending up with curriculum, assessment plans, your scopes and sequence, your task, all that kind of stuff. But because they come out of the concept, just as with a project, there'll always be an inherent alignment between those two. So the thing I do as me, I guess, in this space is really interrogate those concepts that we're starting with. That was a lot, but did that answer? I'm sure it answered your question.
It does. No, look, that's fantastic, actually, what you've just been sharing there, Chanah. And I love what you're saying about, human being, not human capital, and picking up on that. The last comment you made around, yes, you're starting from a concept and then you're bringing it into the curriculum, and you can start from a concept that's really well, deeply reflected upon. And it's with this in mind that I'm going to pitch another question to you. I recently came across Carl Sagan, and he passed away just before 2000, and he was an American astronomer. And as you're speaking, I'm kind of thinking a little bit of him too. He's a planetary scientist, a cosmologist, an astrophysicist, an astrobiologist, an author, and a science communicator. And in addition to all of that, he was passionate about education because he considered that it is not the responsibility of scientists ever to suppress knowledge, no matter how awkward that knowledge is, or no matter how it may bother those in power. So, your human capital. And he was saying that we're not smart enough to decide what pieces of knowledge are permissible and what are not. And when he went into the schooling system, he reported this in a recorded conversation about education. He said, and I'm quoting this, and you can see the language is very American. You go talk to the kindergartens or first grader kids. You find a class full of science enthusiasts. They ask deep questions. What is a dream? Why do we have toes? What is the moon? Why is the moon round? What is the birthday of the world? Why is grass green? Now, these are profound, important questions, and they just bubble right out of them. But you go talk to the 12th graders, and there's none of that. They've become incurious. Something terrible has happened between kindergarten and the 12th grade. So, Hannah, as a subject matter expert in education and special education design, and having listened to your story, what do you think happens to our learning and our sense of inquiry during that age span of 5 to 16 years in a structured school environment? What's going on?
The thing is, I've got a phrase in mind that I could say, but
yeah,
my own mind is wary of daring to make it seem so simple, because it is and it isn't at the same time. It's basically this standardization of education, and the standardization that tramples the spirit of who we are. Because what happens in the education system is that the curriculum that are designed inform us of what is valid knowledge. Like really what he said around what knowledge is permissible. It's not really about, it's not just on like a social level of what's a taboo topic, and whether kindergarten kids should be dealing, to be honest, sorry, I'm just blanking on the phrase, but where they're it's these new in-school education programs where they help them to navigate issues of transgender and unisex bathrooms and that kind of stuff. So I'm not talking about at that level of what is considered taboo or confronting or kind of like challenging or that kind of stuff. I mean more in terms of, a teacher is given a syllabus that has a bullet point of a student can I'll use something that's probably common, identify different landforms. Okay, geography, desert land, okay, whether you're doing rivers or whether you're doing desert lands, they have to be able to identify landforms. Okay, it's part of physical geography, yeah. But what it does is teaching becomes a process of like knowledge transfer and knowledge conveyance. It's like, here's what you need to know, here's what you need to have. And the whole system of education has not been designed to allow for, there's a beautiful paper actually. So I know I'm skipping, but it actually answers the thing. There's a beautiful paper written by someone that I'm whose theory I'm working closely with in my thesis. His name's Gert Biester. And he's got a paper called Risking Ourselves. And there's this process by which, if we're going to continue allowing people to ask questions, we have to allow teaching to become something that does not have the answers. We have to be willing, as adults, step outside teaching, be the parent who says, I don't know, but I can help you find out, so that you know how to look up other stuff for yourself, right? And standardization, it literally creates a container, trying to do a square. It creates a container for the knowledge that people will know and the standards that people have to meet in order to demonstrate their competency, knowledge level, whatever it is, or skill, across now the nation, because we have the Australian national curriculum. So there is no localized, personalized learning.
Yes.
And when all you have to do, like, I'm certain that I can say with confidence that everyone watching this knows that had the experience of education being something where they were sort of told what they had to then regurgitate. Everyone's had that. Now, we've all had the unique teachers who challenged us and made us think, and they stand out as our shining lights. The system is designed still for it to be one of teacher ensures that students have the information and the skills that they've been told to make sure that they have a sausage factory, and they come out with at the end.
Yeah. And is that something that has led to really high, well, I don't know if you say it's really high, but suicide rates amongst our young people? I mean, globally, the World Health Organization says that suicide was the second leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds in 2016. And I mean, I could scan the developed countries and the developing countries, and I just see oceans of evidence that talks about, children being under schooling pressures and it resulting in them taking their own lives. Is that, I know I don't want to get into cause and effect here. I think that's far too limited. But there's a number of contributing factors, isn't there, that if we tweaked a little bit of it even, we might alleviate some of these rather devastating, well, not rather, but very devastating outcomes. Academic stress, achievement stress, future job stress, family reasons, personal reasons, but so much going on there. And I know there's a huge body of psychologists and so on, and looking at this and trying to, unravel it and rectify it. In the light of this, what would you change about the way we approach, learning in schools and universities to reduce those factors that attribute to child and student suicide?
Okay, I just need to write that down because that was a big question.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to say two things. I do need to preface, obviously, that it is such a complex space that I feel even what I've been sharing so far has been little bits of everything and maybe not very clear, lucid, single thought. I'm quite aware of that, but it's a very knotty space. And I had someone say to me once, I was like, I think I really enjoy complexity. And they were like, honey, I think you chase it. so I know I enjoy complexity because it gives me that, there's a term for a disposition. It's like cognitive something. It's where you enjoy having things to intellectually juice on. It's like, that's very me. I like knotty things to think about because then you can just sit deeply and explore your belly button for hours. But in response to your question, you're right, not to oversimplify it and recognizing that these are very complex issues. I think one thing I would definitely change, to keep it simple, rather than talking the whole thing over, I would change assessment practice.
Wow.
Assessment as a concept establishes a sense of value. And the way people have internalized the message of that value is about their personal worth. Wow.
Lovely key message, Hannah. Yeah.
I think it's important actually because I know we're speaking to a wide audience of people who many of whom probably aren't actually in education themselves. But I think it's, if you're doing sort of, corporate training, or, if you're doing like in-house learning and you work in construction, to really think about the qualitative nature of your assessment practice and the message that gives back to the learner. Because, this may sound like a tangent, but it's not. Our personal identity, right? Everything that is physical out into the world is defined through juxtaposition, right? So female cannot exist without anything that is not that, or, any form of sexuality cannot exist without anything that is not that. Everything about the world is defined typically through juxtaposition. I'm wary. I've become so wary of making absolute blanket statements because I'm sure there's someone who can call me out on it. And if you can, please do. Look, you're speaking to an educator, so I want, for you as well to know that this is a space where your thoughts, there's a collective wisdom here right now, even though there's only two faces on the screen, and your thoughts to influence and shape mine are, is as much a gift and all that kind of stuff. So please do speak up in the chat. The thing with assessment practice then is that it sends a message about innate value, because we haven't learned as a society to give our attention to you are valuable because you exist.
Lovely.
Full stop.
Mm.
We have a very the dominant conceptual frame of the world is one of utilitarian. Like, even if you're, you know, a very strong hugger-tree lefty, yes please, it is hard. There are always ways in which, you know, a tree's value will be attributed to its fact to give us oxygen or beauty or paper or whatever, or the fact that it, you know, stabilizes the banks. Like, we justify our value. Its value is because it is. And it's the same for every human being on the planet. The spirit of who you are matters. Full stop. Without assessment, without evaluation, and without measurement. And so when it comes to what I would change, I would work. I really think I really feel it's a strong starting point for change, is to change assessment practice, because it gives a different message back to people about their competency. And about their capacity to continue learning, because it is not a full stop on the journey of being a human being, which is inherently a journey of learning. Like, we've all had to sort of suddenly go, okay, embrace ChatGPT, right? Boom. Okay. Prior to that, embrace online learning and communication. And yes, people have been creative and generative with it, but these were very enforced learnings. But, like, you know, I'm almost 40 and I'm learning stuff. You know, some people have to learn how to use a percolator because they've never used that coffee machine, or, you know, what is this button? Like, how many people go to like a bathroom and go, how do I tap? How do I turn this one on? Right? We're constantly engaging and learning our way through life. So for me, even the term lifelong learning as something that is an outcome of schooling is bizarre for me, because lifelong learning begins with your first breath and ends with your last.
Lovely. Some very gorgeous key messages coming through there, Hannah. I'm loving them. And that emphasis on, if I could change one thing, if I could tweak one thing, it would be around the assessment process. And I think you're so right around that too. The outcome of that change would be monumental, actually. Look, I'm picking up on what you're saying around, you know, the wholeness of the being. And social researcher Brené Brown comments that what we know matters, but who we are matters more. And I think this is what you're moving to as well in the spirit of education. And I'm noting that there is currently still living Susan David, a psychologist and an author, who conducted her postdoctoral research in emotions at Yale University, and she coined the term emotional agility. And she says emotional agility is the ability to be with yourself in a way that's courageous and curious and compassionate. And she talked about it involving some strategies and core competencies. Now, I'm aware that, you know, that a lot of the curriculum is hard skills, sort of not so much the soft skills, like authenticity and empathy and so on. But I wondered how you interpret this as an education designer, and how does this align with the deeper spirit of education, the journey that you've embarked on?
Look, I think I need to, even though you've given me a springboard, I think I need to connect it to this framework of Gert Biester, because it'll give some, you know, very often, I guess in theory, and if you know your educational theorists or familiar with the name Dewey and these people.
Yes.
So like, yeah, Dewey, the thing that's really beautiful about Dewey's work that I'm particularly fond of, so I'm just noticing my change of voice when I get into my, the thing Dewey spoke about actually is the fact that you cannot define something new simply in its contrast to the old, because it doesn't tell you what the new thing is. It's simply a no. It's not a who am I, right? And I think there's a lot to be said for the project of progressive politics. And I'm saying all these broad things because it's the underlying thinking that feeds through them all. But it's the project of progressive politics and the efforts to establish a new education system that is new and not just, you know, sort of like seems to be innovating, tweaks it, but really, really it's same. no different.
Yes.
And in fact, making things worse, because it is still, what it's doing is tightening things even more and more and more. It's getting worse because nothing's changing. So what Gert Biesta does then is he says, the thing about the progressives is that when you start talking about innovation and change, if you think of that as something that is discrete and separate from the old, it can get very scary, and it's easy for a previous frame of reference to kind of like reject that newness as, wacky or too out there, or even, like an organ transplant. Like the body has to understand the thing that's being asked of it, that it's being asked to integrate. And I don't think we've done a very good job of communicating the ideas of innovative and progressive education. Or politics or whatever. And that segues me into Biesta, because what he gives is a framework that doesn't ask us to reject what we understand education to be in terms of our value and the genuine importance on developing skills, getting a qualification, being able to say, I am qualified to do something. That's an important part of education. It's not about suddenly saying, oh, we just have to all go hug trees, or all just be outside, or all just learn online, or all just, in order for education to offer what we want. It still needs to have the capacity to make us qualified at something. So there are tangible and practical skills. It does need to offer us something, or one inherent outcome, he would say, is the socialization, like really understanding that part of education is enabling us to fit in and thereby contribute and be part of the collective. Education would serve no one if it made everyone want to be a hermit on the beach in a shack, which is nice for a weekend for most of us, but not as a way of being. We need to be able to be together with our skills. But the third thing he introduces is the concept of subjectification. And subjectification really is understanding that it is I love the phrase, uniqueness without a template. Gabrielle, you've gone off camera. Are you still with us?
I'm just coughing.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make
I'm listening, but was doing a cough. So, but anyway, we're saying uniqueness, but
without him. And this connects actually to the idea of assessment, because when we understand that education as a whole, in a formal sense, this is not the lifelong learning being, but as in a formal sense, is just training when we have just qualification and socialization, but becomes education in his theory. When you add the importance of developing the uniqueness of who you are as part of that journey, and having space, means, permission, curriculum design, whatever you want to call it, to emerge and invest that passion and love and create almost your own ikigai. Ooh, that's an idea. To create your own ikigai, which is a Japanese framework for finding like your niche. It's like what's needed, what's your skills, and what's your passion, and then like sweet spot is your thing. I think I remember that correctly. But that's when we include the self. And if you dive deeply into that, it becomes the spirit of who we are as people, that the spirit of education becomes established. Because it's not just about sausage factorying us through qualification, becoming just like everyone else through our socialization. So it's about really I think it's both enhancing, but harnessing the uniqueness of who we are as individuals, as part of our own educative experience of life, let alone schooling. That was a bit of a journey. Did that answer your question, Gabrielle?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it does, doesn't it? Because like there's an increasing emphasis in the workplace, and not that we do our education to suit the workplace, but I think in the world in general, an increasing emphasis on the need for emotional intelligence, because empathy, authenticity, values aligned responding, emotional regulation, and so on, and necessary so that we can contribute to our globe, of course, to our world, but actually we can connect with each other and get a sense of belonging. So there's something quite fundamental, I think, that's going on there with our social researchers at the moment, and what you're doing in your space around the need to bring the fullness of the human into the space, and allow that one or each of us to really blossom and flourish in it.
Can I just build on that? I'll try and be brief, because I realize there's another thing you wanted to ask. Two things. One, it's interesting that you say that we don't really educate for people to fit into business, because in many ways, and historically, that was the very intention of it. That was the purpose. It was to enable you to jobs and growth.
Yes,
enable people to get a job, or learn whatever kind of job that was. But it's interesting, there's this thing that's come up, of like, if people are sitting at their desks all day, why are kind of like living that work? Not everyone, obviously, I know there are people in diverse professions. But if there is this strong sit at your computer in many sectors kind of working life, well, why do we want to then, it's a kind of like a bit of a joke, but why do we want to have kids getting up and moving around? We need to train them how to sit and be still and be in front of a computer for longer. Like, think about it, because what it speaks about, I think it's hilarious, right? But the thing is,
terrible.
The training they're getting in school, ironically, fits into the system of life that we've built.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's this really interesting thing of it's almost like education does become a site for social change, but it's not the teacher's responsibility to be activists in that sense. So, it is a very complex thing, but that segue into work. And interestingly, again, I've been, even just today, I went to a luncheon for women in business. I have like a coaching practice that I'm building on the side. You know about it. Just doing that gradually. But it's fascinating to me how many places and spaces I am seeing people go through this journey of system, structure, as is, destroyed me, burnout, reject. I'm going to be the spiritual manifestory, tree huggery. Actually, wait, I have a whole lot of skill and stuff to, like, so much that value that I offer from my experiences. I'm going to bring the two together, and that's what I offer. So it's almost like this thing that Biesta articulates for us as a framework to work with around our qualifications, our socialization, and our subjectifications, the particularities of who we are as unique mixed bag of humans. The world of business is starting to hearken to that mix. And I think in that way, it also even shifts that conversation around what is wellness in the professional space, because wellness stops, it's not the tokenistic thing of done a program, ticked a box, took a 1-day break if the structures that I'm working in haven't changed. But if wellness becomes how do I integrate more of who I am? How do I create breathing space for myself in my working life? And it's not about taking time out, but it's what do I do in it that changes? What structures can we put in place in business for human beings to be more fully present? I think that's a really beautiful proposition that I'm really quite fascinated by. I'm interested in the nexus, the kind of the integration of education to business practice, and how, like, provocation, how can a school change the way we do business?
Well, isn't that a good turnaround question? How can a school change the way we do business? That's a great
Anyone
question.
In the chat and wants to talk about it with me, especially from the business side, like, really, I really want to do this.
So I'm going to push pause here, and I'm going to invite you to take us on a meditation journey. And I'm aware that you've touched on some really gorgeous concepts, actually, and they're very big, and yet at the heart they're quite simple as well. And this aspect of bringing the human into allowing ourselves to be human in these contexts, but also the role of awareness. So let's go on a meditation journey with you, and you can take us to these spaces of awareness and integrity and authenticity and so on, that I think you're saying anchors a really good educative practice. Are you happy to do that?
Yeah, definitely. And what I'm really feeling is just that journey back to the heart of myself. like that simplest question of who am I? But just who am I even before I start to finish that sentence? The one who says, I am, full stop. So let's play with that. It's the starting point, isn't it? So wherever you are, I'm going to invite you to just let your body relax. Allow the weight to ripple down from wherever you notice you're holding it. So notice, where am I holding on? Is it my shoulders, my forehead or jaw? Am I tight through my chest or back? And each time you breathe out, can you let go a little bit more? Allow your organs to soften. Your hips and legs to become heavy. To breathe deep and long. And in this moment of just being still, I become aware that I simply am. I am simply being here right now. I am present in and with this moment. I am neither creating nor producing. I am nowhere else that I could be. I am simply here. And I realize in this moment that my value exists because I am, because I exist. Not because I produce anything of my life for the world, even if in service of others. And it is as simple as that. To know that who I am, even in this simple moment, matters. I am of value. I mean something. I am valued and valuable simply because I exist. And if I choose to deepen this awareness, I allow my attention to dive more deeply into the feeling of me. It's a place my racing mind may not often allow me to go. But I choose in this moment to go there fearlessly, with courage, to open the door of my heart and see myself there. The inner being, the light, radiant and full. Radiant, bold, compassionate, and full. This is who I am. Not because of my acquisitions and achievements. Not because of my accomplishments and attainments. Neither my career, nor job, nor friends, nor family, nor physical health define me, because nothing can define or contain this light, this vibrant, radiant energy of my heart. It exists. It exists in the world because I exist in the world. And is this existence that is of value. I notice a deeper sense of recognition growing with these thoughts. As though I am truly seeing myself and recognizing, yes, this is me. No matter what my career or personal pursuits in life, this is who I am. This radiant, full light and love. The confident one. The compassionate one. And it is my being in whatever steps I take in my life that is of value. I allow these thoughts to settle deep in my being. And then I allow my breath to deepen and gently come back to the awareness of my body, to the room around me, to this new point in time with a richer and even more full awareness of who I am.
A deep dive, wasn't it? A deep dive into the fullness of my self-worth. So thank you for that. And And I can see great possibilities when we anchor structures and systems and whatever else on a very authentic understanding of self-worth, independent of anything else. And Hannah, I've been loving the kind of questions you've been posing, and also some of the expressions you've been using so far. And things like we tend to focus on things we don't aspire to be, and another one was learning moments for everyone. And I think another thing that I was enjoying was a level of becoming, not a level of content. And and in this next part, I really want to focus not so much on the system as it is, because we've been there, we know that, but notwithstanding and appreciating the kind of remedies, if you like, that you were offering when asked. But you've coined an expression, the spirit of education, and I'd like to give some space to you for you to just tell us what you mean by that and what actually is the spirit of education.
All right. I'm going to do a thing on you. I'm going to start. You know what I'm about to do, right? I'm about to flip it back on you. And I want to ask you and anyone else who feels so inclined, actually, I would really strongly encourage you to pop in the chat what it evokes for you. Let's just give it a moment for people to gather their thoughts. There's a concept in education of wait time, WAIT. And it's the idea that when you ask a question, a human brain, a person inside a body, needs some time to digest the question. And the deeper the question, the more time they need to let a sense of what the answer might be rise in their mind. You've got to give people time to come to their answers, not just first hand up, quickest answer, hustle culture. Hustle culture doesn't produce quality, and you're not going to get quality if you try to rush people through their learning. And every question, like physiologically, is learning, because you're asking your brain to put new neurons together, especially if it's about something you haven't thought of before, right? So, Gabrielle, have a think for yourself. And for anyone who has thoughts, please, please, please share them in the chat. And then when you feel you have an answer, maybe share it with us. And then I will go from there.
Yes. It's in many ways something that I have explored or yearned for, and in fact, I did educational philosophy at university, and deeply appreciated and this is obviously many years ago, the keenness with which many people were approaching this whole aspect of education. What is it really about? These big, deep questions. What is it really about? What are we trying to do in it? Rather than looking at what's actually happening. And for me, the spirit of education has got something to do with these sorts of things. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say. It's just going to be a bit of a free range here. But I would value an education that honours the uniqueness of who each one is. And so, yes, there's need to be able to develop skills and so on. But in a real education, I think that being able to, a little bit like what you took us to in the meditation, that deep place of self-worth, an education that whatever I'm, the outside things that I'm learning, it's always reflecting back and underpinning and anchoring my self-worth. And I think that when each one of us are very grounded in our independent self-worth, our own uniqueness, things that we contribute to each other, to ourselves, to each other, to the divine, with the divine, to the environment, to our communities, our countries, and so on. When it's coming from that very authentic space, then I think education that manages to bring that forward in each one of us, and to see where we're moving to from there as well. So it's not static, it's always a movement. That's what I think the spirit of education is something like for me, about getting into the depth of myself within a spiritual context, but also within a system, so the education system. Those are some of my thoughts off the top of my head, Hannah, that I wanted to share with you.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
I'm not sure how close that aligns with the beautiful expression that you've coined, the spirit of education.
I think the thing that you've said a few times, and we've also touched on, is that I don't think, well, I don't think there is an absolute definition, because the reality of it is that the spirit of education is, to some degree, the conglomerate of the spirit of human beings and what they need at a given point in time. And the fact that this is an evolving thing means that the spirit of education itself will evolve. But it's, for me, it's really, and also thank you for going there in responding, because I'm like, I'm here as you've named me as a subject matter expert. So what would it be if all I was doing was a talk fest and this was just a lecture and not offering anything even remotely different to the way every learning has been done to date? So thank you for being part of the collective wisdom with me here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I mean, that's a conversation, and I hope that's enough of a prompt for other people to bring things in through the stuff that's coming up through the YouTube chat. I'd love to hear what other people are thinking, because two things. The phrase does create space for people to see what they need to see in it, if that makes sense. It's kind of like if you look at a circle and say, what do you see? Oh, I see a sun, or I see a moon, or, but what that does instantly is reveal some uniqueness. Like the thing you said at the beginning around the thing I yearn for, I think was your word. And I felt such a pang there of what is lacking in our world, is the honoring of what is the sacred work of education, of enabling people to become. And for me, it's a phrase that existing without template. In other words, what Biesta means in that instance, from a philosophical point, is that you do not know what a person's uniqueness is until they emerge it. It's not something that can be predefined as an educational outcome and therefore ticked off or assessed in advance. Believe me, it is a conundrum for design. Like how do you, or even assessment, you can't assess uniqueness. So what does that mean? And it enforces an entire flip of how we build things. And to be honest, like I said, I'm a nonconformist. So a lot of the stuff and things I'm thinking, those ideas, they're there, but they're not really, en masse being embraced. So I'm in a bit of a sort of like pushing the edges zone with this, but welcome to my brain. So I think the thing with spirit of education is there's almost like a question underpinning it of what is it that we give space and time for? And there's a beautiful concept in a book by Ron Rickard, which is, he speaks of the 8, he uses the word forces, but more metaphorically than as like a push. So like the 8 cultural forces that we like truly need to understand to transform our schools. That sort of mashup of his book title. And one of them is time. And at the outset, he says, the way we use our time reflects what it is we value.
Yes, of course.
How many meetings have you ever been to that start with the administrative conversation and run out of time for the substantive, meaty stuff that we really, really need to converse about and get under the skin of? And seriously, that stuff we all know could be tick boxed in 5 minutes. So why not just flip that? Why not just flip that? That's kind of like almost like that's a design choice to structure our time according to what we value. So the spirit of education, then, I don't have an absolute, this is what it is, because the spirit or soul of a human being, it's like a zeitgeist. It moves. It's like a river. It changes the scenery and it's in and amongst. But what is the heart and soul of education? What is the thing that we are doing that we call education, and I can actually speak to that in a more like tangible sense in a sec, but the question that might prompt us to discover what that is for now is the what's needed, because then education becomes a formal structure that is in service of people rather than vice versa, right? So if we're then thinking what's needed, and we're thinking about, to be honest, I just lost my own train of thought. How we structure our time and learning. Rats, it's gone. I took myself on a tangent I couldn't come back from. That's hilarious. I always told my students, you can go on tangents. No, I can go on tangents because I can come back. You can't. they could never come back. In the classroom, I'm really good at coming back to where we left off, but I've just out tangented myself.
It'll come back. It'll come back.
I think the essence of it really is that the spirit of education is the heart and soul of a thing. It speaks metaphorically to what it is we're trying to capture and offer and then design for. And it's, you know what it is actually? It's also a prompt really to look at what is it that we're allocating our attention to. And my personal, like if I think the ed leadership space, what people have been talking about for a very long time, and, you know, moves, you know, we need innovation, we need people to have agency, we need people to have this. I feel, and this is literally me speaking for myself, whether you put me in the ed, like futurism or ed, you know, ed leadership space or whatever, or design, I think we're at a point in time where we need to start trumpeting the word spirit and soul a lot more strongly. And we've actually reached a point in time where the cumulative, like the collective, are comfortable enough with that word that we can say, we need to allocate our attention to this. So it's actually, it's something that emerged, like sort of like a download idea, but it's actually, let's allocate our attention to the spirit of things as the place that we design from, to the spirit of people, to the atmosphere in the room. Let's really talk about, let's design with an understanding of, I remembered it, I got my tangent back, to the metaphysical, almost ineffable and indescribable experiences of our life that flow as an absolute tangible reality for us. What if we designed education with that in mind? What if we designed business structures with that in mind? I went to a webinar yesterday. I have a friend who has, you know, made his path through change management and has built an incredible change management software that is something like Asana meets Outlook and Teams integration. Like, it's this brilliant thing that houses everything in the software. It's great. But I was listening to these people talk change management, and it's not my expertise, obviously, but I have, you know, what I'm doing in education is inherently about change. So I was interested. And I could hear that everything that they were describing about change and change management and business is totally true to our experience of life captured in particular language, but starting from attention to a particular thing, that being the structures that govern the operations of things. So change management, as much as education, like our whole world, is structured by focusing on the structures of things, right? And what's been removed from that picture is designing and scaffold, or kind of like, you know, cultivating our world with attention to the spirit of things.
So moving away from the 3 R's, if you like, and moving into the 3 S's, sacred, soul, and spiritual.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah. And using those as design principles.
Yeah, you know, the 3 S's.
How do you design for the human soul?
Sacred, soul, and spirit.
Thank you. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I just listening to you and feeding it back, really.
Oh, right.
There's I mean, a spirit is about that, isn't it? Sacred souls and spirit. And spirit. So, and of course, my mother was a school school teacher, so I learned all about the 3 R's, so moving it to the 3 S's.
It speaks to something that's deeper.
Hannah, there's a question that's come in that I really want to pitch to you before we run out of time. And I know we've talked about time and prioritizing things, but I think we need to pitch this one. In hearing and feeling wholeheartedly in alignment with your vision, Chanah, how do you see Rudolf Steiner education as a possible framework to support building a unique education system? And the rest of it's been cut off, so I'm not sure what the rest of it says, but I think there's enough in there for you to be able to make a response to it. And just to let you know, there's 2 more coming in, so maybe a little bit.
Lovely. No, thank you everyone for joining the conversation. It makes it richer. So let me speak briefly. I worked at a Steiner organization where we offered day program services to adults with moderate to severe disabilities. So to that degree, to that extent alone, am I familiar? No. I understand a little bit more of anthroposophy and Steiner, but I'm not an expert. I actually have more familiarity with Montessori, but let's talk about alternative education. I think there is a lot that they offer in terms of principles, but maybe not practices. There was an interesting thing that came out of a research paper that I was a research assistant on a project for Montessori education, and the paper's just been published. So within that research, it was an interesting quote came out from one of the principals that was interviewed, saying that it's been completely anonymous, so this is safe. Montessori is for every child, but maybe not for every parent. And I think, yeah, good, huh? So I would think I would say something similar of Steiner. I don't think it's, if we go back to that thing I was saying around the, and I'm sorry I don't know your name, so I can't address you personally, and I would otherwise. I don't think Steiner per se, or Montessori per se, or any of the alternative education frameworks are the answer. There is no panacea to this. But what it is looking at the fact that all of these alternative curriculum are designed with different principles. They emerge from a different lens. Like if we look at spirit as a lens and a concept to design with, these all look at different things. So I think we can learn from how they've developed and perhaps what it was that Steiner and Montessori and democratic schools and, even homeschooling as a principle. I don't know enough about that world either. But what are the principles? And even what about regenerative schooling, regenerative education? What about taking a permaculture as a principle for education design? It's designing from principle rather than from practice. And it's the emphasis on practice that has stifled the shift in principles to a more substantive and enriched education system for all. I hope that somehow speaks to the question you were asking.
Thank you. Let's get another one in too, if we can, please, Chanah. How do you see homeschooling?
Right. One, we know that there's a massive growth in it post-COVID, but also post teaching crisis. Teaching crisis comes out of policy frameworks where they see structures, and literally neoliberal policy implementation is a process of tightening the noose. The intention is to tighten things and smooth out processes, which, like standardization and creativity, there are not many things in the world that I will say are mutually exclusive, like very, very few things, but standardization and creativity, literally mutually exclusive. So the way in which policy is designed for education stifles what we want to create of education and for people. Homeschooling, what do I make of it? I don't think it's the solution. Maybe for more parents, but not for every child, like the other way around on that Montessori quote. Personally, I think there's a lot of value of enabling young people to live and work and be around and deal with the mess that being with teenagers brings. Like I used to work in high school, and teenagers are feisty and sassy and alive and full of passion and ideas. And it is valuable for young people to navigate in their world with other people. I don't think it's necessarily left. It can be better if parents have the emotional time and sense of capacity to offer the kind of rich education they want for their kids. What does it mean for parents if they end up getting burnt out, or they're trying, like I don't know enough of the structures of how parents navigate that, but if you're draining yourself or end up feeling for some reason that you're not giving what you want, like there aren't enough support systems in Australia for parents to support them through the homeschooling, like almost like teacher education for homeschooling parents, right? I think it's a very, what do I think of it? I think it's a really interesting blank slate at the moment. I think because it's such an unexplored space en masse, there's a lot of good that could be created from it. I think people going into it need to consider, what are the outcomes of this going to be for myself, for my family, for my child or children who come in, and are those qualitatively likely to be of benefit, not just the assumption that because they're not in a school, they're getting a better option. To interrogate it, really, to think about it deeply first.
Thanks, Hannah. And I'm going to pitch a last question before we need to close out. How can I overcome a fear of learning new things?
Oh, I love this. I'm going to take it in a slightly very deep space and then come back to the pragmatics of learning. One is the fact that learning new things and the fear. I don't know who's asked this, but sometimes learning new things requires extending ourselves in some way, and that can be quite an existential challenge. There might be someone, whoever's asked might be someone with people might have a deep depression or anxiety, like a really strong mental health challenge that makes it challenging to feel safe, to take things in and embrace new ideas. My suggestion would really be, in a practical sense, to do something very small and simple, to make learning joyful rather than feeling like you need to to make something small and simple joyful, to create a new somatic experience of what learning feels like. I'm going to reach my phone. Hold on. I will say very openly, last year was a very, very challenging year for me. I moved back from the Blue Mountains to Sydney, and I kind of had to put myself in a bit of a cave just to do a bit of taking care of me so that I could come back out into the light. And one thing that I found was magic was Duolingo. I don't know if you can see that. I'm not going to show you my app. So Duolingo is a free language learning app, and I actually started learning French. And you can do 5 minutes a day. And I'm not saying you have to learn language, but it is so small that you start to feel the joy and success of accumulating something. Small bite-sized pieces that give you joy. It could be something as simple as walking a different route home and allowing yourself to notice something about that. Like, oh, look, there are different trees on this road rather than that road home. You've literally learned something, right? I'm consciously saying actually to set aside the concern about the fear you feel and work towards creating a different embodied experience of learning. Because very often we'll go into the psychology of the spin around, why do I feel afraid? Let me overcome my fear. What could, childhood trauma, all that kind of stuff. But the disposition I was describing before, need for cognition, it's kind of like that. For me, the enjoyment of learning things new is new as well as new things, is a muscle that I've been developing since I was young, because I grew up in a family and a culture where it was celebrated, right? So I realized that I'm very fortunate in that sense. So again, just to make it simple, because it's actually a very, very deep question, and I want to honor also the vulnerability and sense of possibility that you recognize for yourself, that it is possible to learn without feeling fearful. So let's add a third one. One, hold on to that sense of light in yourself that recognizes, like the question inherently says, I know something more is possible for me. So now let me find just small incremental ways to experience that possibility, and then gradually move into bigger, more expansive things, but not feel like you have to eat the whole cake in one go. I hope that speaks to the person, whoever asked the question. I hope that speaks to it.
A beautiful answer, Hannah. Thank you so much. And as we close out, I'm wondering if you could take us into perhaps a smaller meditation, maybe a 3-minute meditation, just to harness some of those feelings and ideas that you've shared with us in the second part.
Yeah. So let's just start by being comfortable in our own skin. Taking a deep breath in. And as I breathe out, letting my awareness be just this full moment. A moment that I, with my awareness, am filling. Simply by being conscious of myself, I create the moment. I create my experience of this moment. And I allow this awareness to become, for myself, a point that I can return to in moments of uncertainty and newness. When I wake each morning, the reality of life is that I do not know what my day will be like. I may have activities planned. I may have a schedule and my morning routine. But the reality is, I do not know when I put my head on the pillow at night what the day will be like, will have been like. But I am always here. This light, this inner centered self. I can always return my awareness to the fullness, the softness, the radiance, and the simple presence of who I am as something certain. Whenever I am perhaps uncertain of things. I make a conscious choice and a commitment. I decide right here and now to be my own anchor. To know that the spirit of who I am is the leading light in the journey of life that is a learning journey. One in which the world will continue to change around me, and relationships and friendships may come and go. Career paths may alter. There might be environmental change, or I might move house. But I will always be here. I will always be on my journey. And so the entire journey will always be valuable. I will always have my inner stability, my inner safety, and my inner certainty of fullness, of love, and that things, quite simply, are good.
Thank you, Hannah. You're sharing tonight about the spirit of education. Well, it's been insightful, it's been practical, hopeful, and visionary, and you've delivered it with much passion. So our blessings and our love to you, Hannah, and we wish you well in your lifelong learning and your academic pursuits this year, and your blossoming career, which you approach with deep intelligence, creativity, and benevolence. It's most striking. So our thanks for joining us on Youniverse this evening. Thanks so much, Chanah.
Thank you so much for having me. Really, the gift is mine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if if there is anyone professional, it'd be worthy that you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram, although that's sort of a combination of sort of just professional deep reflections and personal stuff, but you're welcome to reach out there. But LinkedIn is a good space as well if you'd like to connect.
It's wonderful. And viewers, please do connect in with Hannah if you wish to. A great opportunity. And viewers, you might like to browse our online bookshop, Eternity Inc., which has a full online range of books on self-empowerment and spirituality. And they're always at not-for-profit prices. And if you'd like to subscribe to Open Your Eyes to the Universe to receive monthly updates, then please email us. And you can do that at special.events@au.brahmakumaris.org. And I'd like to tell you now about our next episode of Open Your Eyes to the Universe. We'll be with Marta Mataran and Luciana Rossi, two experienced yoginis from Barcelona in Spain and New York in North America, respectively. And their topic is demystifying solitude. Now that's on Saturday, the 22nd of April at 6 p.m. That's AEST. Daylight saving will have finished by then. And as we close out tonight, we'll be playing Saturn by Sleeping at Last, a most beautiful song and so relevant for tonight's topic. So until we see you again on the 22nd of April, take care, walk lightly on this earth, and engage fully with your sacred soul, spiritual, lifelong learning for yourself to be the person that you really want to be. Om Shanti.